Is this my Lauren? Hi. I'm glad you made it today. I can't hear you. You're muted.
I don't know what was going on yesterday.
Sometimes I feel like Zoom does weird things. There was one other person that couldn't get in. I'm gonna let people in. I'm glad. I mean, I'm always glad when technology works the way it's supposed to, and it's always bums me out when it doesn't. But there was one person with an iPhone that couldn't get in, and Joyce and I did a lot of tech support trying to figure it out. And we just couldn't figure it out. So hopefully she'll be able to come in. See, there's one person with an iPhone. Yay! So, yes, welcome. Welcome to the early people. I'm always early to everything. I hate being late. I get super stressed about lateness. I'm probably like really harsh on myself when it comes to being late because, I'm always on time. I do tell a funny story about lateness. I have a client that's been my client a long time. And she mentioned that it was her birthday. And so like in my head, I made up mental notes to remember her birthday. And then of course it was like coming up not that long into the future. And then I woke up on her birthday and I didn't know that it was her birthday on my phone. I just know that I had her in my head. So I woke up, I got dressed, and I started driving to her. And then there was an accident on the highway, on the Beltway. And so I texted her and I was just like, man, I'm going to be like 15 minutes late. And she texted me back and she was like, I love to see you, but today is my birthday and I'm pretty sure I don't have an appointment with you. And I was like, oh man, today is your birthday and happy birthday. And you were like, I was like, I knew I had to remember you for some reason. And then I was like, oh my God, I'm supposed to be going somewhere else. And there's another person expecting me. So I finally looked at my calendar and then I realized that I was like going to the wrong direction altogether. Right. So I literally had to get off the Beltway and get on the other way. And so I called my other client and I was like, funny story. I was not paying attention and I went the wrong direction thinking I was seeing another client instead of you. So she laughed. She was like, oh my God, this is so funny that you of all people would do that. And so I turned around, made my way around. Of course, now I'm like an hour late, right? And so I get there and she was so gentle and kind. She was like, it must be really hard for you to be late. And I was like, yes, it was. So she actually made me tea. She was like, you look frazzled. Let me make you some tea. And she made me tea. And like we talked for a few minutes. And it was just like, I was like, oh my God, it's such a big deal to be late. So for me, I think like in the very first meeting, I shared that, I started organizing because it was a way of coping for me. Because I have had severe anxiety my whole adult life, and I have been somewhat anti-medication. So I try to cope in the healthiest ways possible. And of course, organizing was a thing that came naturally to me. So when I started organizing people for a living, when I found organizing, first of all, I was like, people do that for a living. And then I was like, people are willing to pay me to do that. And then of course it was like, it turned out to be like a great way for me because I feel like a lot of my stress gets relieved during the daytime as I'm helping people get organized. And I come home and I'm much less obsessive about my own junk. Right? Just looking around my desk today, I'm like, ooh, I could use some help myself. So I'm grateful to be here. It's day 3. I was just on the phone with my sister Vanessa, who some of you may know. She's also my business partner in Organizing Maniacs. And she did not opt into the challenge, which I was like, what's up with that? she was like, let's be real. 5 days of organizing seems like a lot. Whose idea was that? And I was like, oh, this is intense. How are we doing? I was like, maybe five areas in 5 days is too much. I was like, This morning I was looking at the pantry. I was like, oh my God, day 3 pantry. How do we do this? Um, so I don't know, this is our first time doing 5 areas in 5 days. So feedback is always welcomed. And I feel like, as we dwindle down our group to like the really hardcore people, we'll see how well do we do. And I want to remind everybody that once again, the goal of this, the five challenges in 5 days is not to feel stressed. So if you're feeling stressed and you're feeling like, oh man, I haven't even got my junk drawer organized yet, don't worry about it. Like, the challenge can be ongoing. It can last more than 5 days. Like the goal is not to stress anybody out. The goal is to maybe get something done. Like I would feel good. I did get my junk drawer organized on day 1. And when I woke up, was that yesterday? That was day 2. And I was like, oh, my junk drawer is so nice and neat. That made me happy. And this morning, when I could easily find the extra poop bags in my coat closet, I was pretty happy too. One of my neighbors, Mary, walks my dog completely out of her own goodwill. I was like, I will pay you to walk the dog, but she just literally, she texts me at 6 o'clock in the morning and she says, can I take your dog for a walk? And I was like, hell yeah. So 2 to 3 times a week, she takes my dog Willow on a walk with her. And it's kind of dark, she's like an older person. I assume she wants the companionship of the dog, but she doesn't have to have a dog of her own. And I am like, hey, my dog is so hyper, like she could use 3 walks a day. So why was I telling this story? Oh, because I had to go find the poop bag for her. And like normally I'm like, where's their extra poop bags? Because I'm looking for them laying around. And of course, they had been bunched up on the bottom of the coat closet. I was excited to find the poop bags in my little organized things. I posted some pictures for you guys in the Facebook group last night. I hope you got to enjoy it. I also posted a picture of my messy area that I feel like always turns out to be the co-hanger of the banister area. I didn't find anything interesting in there because once again, I feel like I just organized that not that long ago. That's what happens when you're obsessive compulsive. You're like always organizing. When I first started therapy, I would, I would cope sometimes with like, all my feelings after going to therapy. Like I would clean the refrigerator. I find cleaning the refrigerator so soothing. I know it's like weird. And maybe the refrigerator organizing should be part of the 5-day because that doesn't feel like a really challenging, that doesn't feel like an overwhelming project. I'm going to put that on the list. But like I would clean the refrigerator, and then like as the more therapy I did, I'd be like, oh, this week was only like a 1-day cleaning refrigerator kind of week. And the people in my, in my therapy group would laugh. They'd be like, that's good. That's a good gauge, right? It's like, you're not my refrigerator is kind of really messy right now. It makes me think about maybe I'm going to do that as my fun project, my free project that we're going to do on Friday. So I'm going to put my refrigerator on my list. But anyway, welcome everybody. I feel like I didn't introduce myself. I always assume that, people know me. I'm Chris, and you are on day 3 of our 5-day organizing challenge, which used to be 30 days. And I thought that was too long. And I was like, why don't we just cram it all in 5 days? And I don't know how we're feeling, but I was feeling a little stressed a little while ago. So today we are, I don't know if anybody has any questions about their coat closet. I see everybody's muted and with their cameras off. So if you have a question and you want to ask, you can do so now. Otherwise, I feel like coat closets. Oh, you know what? I forgot to post the video about the coat closet organizing. I'll do that today. I feel like coat closets can be fairly easy. And I think the one reminder about every project, right, is to remind ourselves that we want to always break down the project into smaller sections. So the goal here is to not at any time feel completely overwhelmed or to just tackle on too much at the same time that it then feels like really overwhelming and messy. So we talked about yesterday about considering every part of the coat closet to be a separate project, right? The top, the middle, and the bottom to be three different areas. And if you have a bigger co closet or co room or mud room or whatever you have, to break down those projects into smaller sections so then you can manage a little bit at a time. And the goal is always to just like pull a section out, evaluate what you have, kind of sort and categorize, make decisions about what you want to keep and what you want to get rid of. Organize what you want to keep back into the space. And organizing could just mean putting it back, or it could mean using some containers or some ways to like organize your stuff better. And then disposing of what you don't want. We talked about amnesty of things, and I know that a lot of the reasons why a lot of my clients sometimes have too much clutter is because we want to make sure our stuff goes to a good home. And the in the process of trying to find good homes for things, we can become the landfill version of our homes, because we have all of these things. They're broken, that can't be repaired, or that can't be donated, or they're too complicated to fix, and we're not letting go of this stuff. So in this process, I was just, I would advise people to just give yourself amnesty. And if you have done your very best to, repair or fix or find a good home for these things, but there isn't a good place for it to go, that it would be okay for some of it to go. And we talked about rubber bands. There was one item that came up for me in my junk drawer, because I feel like there's always an abundance of it. And what the heck do you do with all of those rubber bands that you really don't have any use for? And we came up with some ways to recycle it, and some ways to, to just get rid of them, and some ways to organize them. But around, as we go around our house, there's lots of those things that we just like, what do we do with? And I want you to have permission to not be bogged down in that. Like, just let it go of that stuff, and then it'll just probably make your life a little bit easier. So pantries, pantries are one of my most favorite projects, because I feel like, there's always so much in there that, it's just like purchase mistakes. Um, I wanted to do show and tell. So I was pulling a couple of my favorite bins out of the pantry. And I was like, when I pulled this particular basket out, there were like some snacks in here. And I was like, those snacks taste terrible. And when snacks taste terrible, because the children won't eat it, right? It's like, if it's sitting in the pantry for more than a couple of weeks, it's like, it's for sure not ever going to be eaten, because they have a way of like identifying the tasty, yummy stuff, and then it just disappears. So those are like, and Rob tries to be really healthy. So he buys things that are like sugar free, or like no artificial flavor added to it. And I'm like, if you're going to have a snack, like, have the snack. That's just my personal opinion, like when I'm having a snack, I just want the whole thing. I don't want it to be downgraded in any way. So he bought these banana chips that taste like cardboard. And I was like, they were still in this bin. And I was like, I don't think I can even take those to the pantry. I would not want to torture anybody else with the poor taste of those banana chips. So those are going to go. But I like using containers, and I think it was Anne that asked me yesterday or the day before about whether if the drawer should be containerized completely. I don't believe that drawers should be containerized completely, but I do believe in using more containers in pantries, because I like things to be like, I feel like if you add some sort of boundary to the stuff, especially like, a lot of the things that go in pantry could be in bags, or they're just kind of like, they feel like loosey goosey. And those things get really visually messy when they are not containerized, right? So I love these. I purchased these from Target. They're, of course, once again, this is before the pandemic. They used to be super cheap. They come in like 5 or 6 colors. They come in like a fun blue, pink, black, white, gray. So there's like lots of different options here. They probably come, I think, in like 6 or 7 smallish size. I like this particular size because it's like long and slim. So it just fits the depth of most pantries. It's like tall, so it holds on to things. So this tends to be one of my favorite bins. I use this particular size of bins quite a bit in people's homes. I love these little baskets too, which comes from the same, these are shallowers. I mean, these are teas, so they're like pretty short and slim. Um, I have an extensive tea collection, so I tend to put my tea in them. When people come and visit, I just pull the basket and I give them to them. I have a basket specifically for the kids that's like caffeine free for stuff that they can have in the afternoon or into the night. So I stash the things that they can have in there. So it's super easy for them to just go and pick out from the bin. I love these. These are like just wire mesh baskets. This is either the Magnolia collection or the Shea McGee collection, also from Target. And I bought these a couple of years ago, so I'm not sure that they're still available, but I feel like every time I go there, they have a varied version of these. So I like to put, what I have in these are like grains and pastas. The pasta that just comes in the bag. To me, they feel unruly, so I stick them in a basket like this. And I love these because it has boundaries and it's a good container, but I can see what's inside, right? And you can barely see that there's a basket there. Like you can still see all this stuff pretty easily. And then of course, the latest and greatest thing is like these home edit bins from the Container Store. These are a splurge. I mean, these, by the time you pay for the taxes, they are like almost $30 for a bin. So they are, I know, I see your head, Natalie. And the thing about these though is that they are a perfect size for shelving and they don't waste any space. I do have to give those guys credit for creating a bin that just like really, they line up together really nicely, and they occupy the entire space, where some of these bins, it's like, the roundness of it is just kind of like makes the clunking closets. These don't waste any space at all. So those are like my favorite go-to pantry organizing products that I use. I think one other problem that we find when we organize pantries, right, is the things that we didn't eat, that we don't love, or that we bought that we're not, it's like my banana chips snacks that you're like, no one is ever going to eat this, and it's just, this doesn't matter how long you have it or how much you try it. I have to make sure my computer's charging, otherwise I'm going to lose everybody. And we need me to be here. So there are all of the things that we have in our pantry that are probably never going to be consumed. And there are a couple of things we can do with those, right? One is there are lots of food pantries around that are willing to take your items as long as they're not expired. Or if they are expired, they can't be very expired, right? If they're expired by like maybe like a month, most places will take them, but if they're really further expired, they cannot take them, just because they're going to go in the pantry. And of course, you don't want to give people something that is no longer good. And I know that a lot of people have, feelings about expiration dates, but the truth about pantries is that they do have to follow some sort of safety guideline. And so they do have to throw that stuff away. And so I feel like we don't want to waste volunteer time, wastelessly. Like, we want to be conscious of the fact that there are some volunteer people. They're going to be, sorting through the stuff that we're donating to then put it in the pantry. So we want to be diligent about the stuff that we donate. I think most pantries don't take things that are opened. There's a comment about micro kitchen. Let me read that. Any tips for micro small kitchens with no pantry and minimal? Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute. There are some, they will not take anything that's opened. So you can only take things that are, containerized in the original condition. They will not take anything that's perishable. So you can only take cans and boxed items and things like that. Be conscious of the expiration dates, but there are lots of pantries. I mean, I actually am really lucky that Wumco has like a little shed right in Poolsville. So whenever I work with clients, I literally take my food to the little shed, and then I leave it there. A lot of these pantries do have like um, hours of donation that you can take them to. I know Loudoun County was very generous with their time, like when they would take stuff. So there are places that you can take that stuff to. And sometimes, like during the pandemic, I mean, like in the very beginning of the pandemic, I bought like animal crackers, and I bought what are those things called? They're not Hot Pockets. They are Pop Tarts. I probably hadn't had Pop Tarts in like, I don't know, 20 years. But I was like, oh my God, it's a global pandemic. I need Pop Tarts. So I bought like, let's just be honest. I bought 5 boxes of them because I thought like, well, they could live for a long time. And then of course, like by December of 2020, I was just like, oh, I'm not gonna eat these Pop Tarts. So my next door neighbor at the time had 3 boys. So I texted her and I was like, Cindy, I have a large thing of animal crackers and Pop Tarts. And she was like, uh, impulsive pandemic shopping. I was like, yes. And so she was like, and then I did say, I was like, well, I was dating a man and he liked those things. So I bought them, but he and I are no longer together. So are you interested? And then she texted back, she was like, was he a boy? So that was kind of a funny thing. But she took on she took on my animal crackers and my Pop Tarts, and her kids enjoyed it. So sometimes you could maybe text your neighbor and be like, I have an abundance of this thing. Are you interested in? Right. Because I knew those items would be something that her children would be interested in. So I was thoughtful in my getting rid of, but I could have very well taken them to the pantry and just given them to somebody. So I think one other thing that I struggle with sometimes is like, I grew up in Brazil, which is like, there's a lot of people with food insecurity. So my mom would just be really diligent about always using up the things that we had and not causing any waste. And I feel like now as an adult, I probably I'm not as good about it as like I was when I was a kid. And so sometimes I do have this, it's it's a realistic thing, right? I think like I've watched some of those documentaries on food waste and how much we throw away and how much food the like goes into the landfill. And sometimes when I'm working with people and even with myself, I'm like, oh man, it just feels really bad to throw this stuff in the trash. Right. And so sometimes when I'm cleaning my own pantry, right, I do make a commitment to like, okay, there's this thing, it's expired and I don't feel fair to throw it in the trash. And then I commit to using it like immediately, right? And then if I don't, then if like I give myself 1 week period, and if I don't, then I just have to let it go. And not that long ago, I worked with a client, and she had 3 items in her pantry, and they were kind of like she was feeling the same anxiety, like I don't really want to throw this in the trash. I just feel really bad about the environment. And I was like, okay, well then you have to make a recipe with these 3 items. And they were not things that would have gone together in the same recipe, but she did commit and she did make 3 recipes that took those items in, and then she used them up. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so proud of you, right? And my client Sarah, I was like, we celebrated, and she told me, she was like, actually one of the dishes turned out really yummy. It's probably something I'm going to make again. So it forced her into actually, kind of stepping out of her routine of the things that she cooked because she wanted to use these items, and made sure that they didn't go in the trash because it's a little bit more difficult to use it. So if you feel like you're bugged down on some of that, like, oh man, I spent good money on this and no, I don't, I can't get rid of it, then I would say like make a commitment, make a list, try to find a recipe, try to find a way to use up that stuff. Otherwise, you have to just commit to letting it go because expire food doesn't last forever. So the question about micro kitchens and small small places, that's always a real challenge, because I think that the truth is that like you only have limited real estate, right? And the truth is that like everything that goes into a micro kitchen has to be multi-purpose, has to be really useful. So then you just have to start eliminating things, right? It's like, what is it that's like really important to have, and what is it that's not? I have, in my very first apartment, I had a super small kitchen. It was like so tiny. I had like 3 overhead cabinets and then 3 cabinets in the where the sink was, and that was all the space I had. And as a young person, right, I didn't have a lot of junk. So that was super simple. I also am one of those people that I don't I don't buy a whole lot of different things. Like my grocery list probably from when I was 20 is fairly similar to my grocery list like now that I'm 50. I am like pretty standard on the way that I eat. I'm not one of those people that like go up and down the Wegmans, aisles wondering like, "Oh, what am I going to try today?" I'm a purposeful shopper. I have a list, I know what I'm getting, and then I'm in and I'm out. So, when you have small spaces for your pantry, you also have to be more diligent about like what are you storing in there and what you get. And the truth is that, it's the same thing with any small space, right? You have to be deliberate about how you're using the space, which means that you have to give up some space to have others. I did work with a client downtown that had a tiny little kitchen, and she had an enormous tea collection. Like we were sisters at heart, and the truth, I was like, okay, well, if you want to have this much tea, then there's lots of things that you cannot have. And she was like, that's fine. I will commit to having like 2 plates and 2 bowls and, and 2 cups and 2 mugs. And, like she limited all of it. Like she had one bowl and 2 pots, and like everything about her kitchen was very streamlined because she wanted to have an abundance of tea. And I was like, that seems fair, right? You're not trying to have like an entire 12 place setting of, uh, eating ware plus china plus crystal in a tiny kitchen. She was like, the only thing that's really important to me is my tea. And so that became the thing that she needed to have. That took almost an entire cabinet. And I was like, if that's how you want to use your space, then I respect that. And then that means you have to give up another space. So I also find that sometimes you have to be creative with how you're using the space. A lot of the times when I work with people and they have no pantry or they have small cabinets, you may have to look outside of your kitchen to like store stuff, right? And once again, it's giving up real estate that may be valuable elsewhere for other things to then store your extra food. The biggest challenge I have had in the last 3 years is like where to store all of the toilet paper and paper towels that people are keeping, because I feel like we're the generation that is never going to be without a supply of paper towels and toilet paper, just because, we were traumatized by by the lack of those 2 things for, I don't know, it feels like 6 or 7 months. So, and people are giving up space for other things to have that supply, right? So it's the same thing. Like, can you find space in other areas? I find that people that live in small spaces also tend to buy little pieces of furniture. When you live in a small space, you actually have to occupy lots of space, right? You have to think high, you have to think wide. So little pieces of furniture are not useful in your home. I have a client that I have had for a long time. I met her and her husband when they were like just married, and now they're like pregnant with their 3rd kid. And when I first worked with them, they had this tiny space and all of these little pieces of furniture. And I was like, we have to eliminate all of this furniture, get some big pieces of furniture, and then use the space differently. And so we were able to create some extra storage. And we actually bought one of those IKEA pieces with cubbies. And then some of it on the top was like, books, and some of it was decorative. And then some of the bottom pieces we used as food pantry for them because they didn't have any space in their kitchen. And so sometimes you have to spill over into other areas, which is really the only way to do it. Yeah, dining room spill over, no room for appliances. That's really, I am always very conscious of like especially appliances, because now it's like we do have a lot of, these things are really inexpensive, and we can have a lot of them, and we just have multiples of, I literally have 3 waffle makers. Why does a human being need 3 waffle makers, right? It's like they're different sizes and different shapes, and one is just tiny and fun, like it's only like this big of a waffle. So, if I lived in a small space, I barely would be able to have one, right? And also sometimes considering things that are like multi-use. So, my oven now is an air fryer, right? So like I no longer need to have an air fryer that's separate. So thinking about, and I know that that's not an option for everybody, but like purchasing as appliances become smarter, to just purchase things that are like, multi-purpose, so you don't have to have as much or as many, maybe, maybe important, especially not just in small spaces. I think in every kitchen I see I see so much stuff that people have that they only use for one purpose, and that takes a lot of space and it takes a lot of bandwidth to organize. So consider that. I feel like we spilled into the kitchen and out of the pantry, so I'm going to go back to the pantry again. So containerizing seems important. Take one shelf at a time when you're like, when you're organizing. And I like to take the stuff out and then maybe start organizing it back in. So, as I take everything out of the top, in my current top pantry, we have like cereals and cans. And so if I was to organize the area, I probably would clear up the top and then put things back, as like, if I decided to change the shelving around, then just start putting the stuff that's going to go, so you don't end up with an entire pantry spilled over your kitchen, because that can be really overwhelming to just about anybody, including me, who is, I'm very organized, but like sometimes when we're doing pantries and we have everything out, I'm like, oh man, this is going to be rough, right? So it's easier to just start kind of staging it. Where do you want to go as you're pulling it out and back in? I like, of course, check expiration dates to make sure that everything's still current. Evaluate whether I really like that thing anymore, or if anybody in the house is really going to eat the thing that's supposed to be there. Uh, Decide what to do with the stuff that you don't want. Right? Are you going to throw it away? Are you going to call your neighbor or your friend, or are you going to take it to the pantry? Um, and then the stuff that you want to keep back, like, is there some need for some storage containers to make it better? I highly recommend, at least for like grains and lentils and, couscous and whatever, those really plasticky, uh, pasta things that you may have that may be unruly, they may be well suited for, a couple of bins in your pantry. I also have a large bin of like oils and vinegars. I do, like, Rob is a really big cook, and he's like one of those fascinating people that will just like open the refrigerator or open the pantry, like pick a few things out and make amazing meals out of it without a recipe. I know everybody hates people like that. There is something to hate about it though. They can never make the same recipe twice. So like sometimes I say like, oh, can you make me that thing again that you made? And he'll be like, no, because I don't even remember what I put in it. I just throw things together and then delivers a lovely meal, and that's the end of that. So therefore there is some experimental stuff in my pantry that necessarily wouldn't be used, a lot, but it's used once in a while. So I do have a large bin of like oils and vinegars and sauces and random things that live there. I like to containerize those because I feel like they're liquidy and they're messy, and they, once again, they get kind of like spilly over into like spaces. So I containerize them so it feels to me like they're in a manageable small area. So I don't know. I think those are my only tips about. Let's talk for like 30 minutes. I'm like so wordy today. Um, I think those are my only tips. Does anyone have any questions or comments or concerns about your pantry? I feel like, Angela, did I cover all your questions on small spaces? Yes. Okay. All right. So no questions, no comments, no concerns.
I do have a question. What do you
Oh.
think about the trend to put dry things like cereal into jars and taking them out of their original box?
Um, I, I mean, I personally do that myself because I feel like my pantry, the shelves are actually stationary, so they do not adjust at all. So it was hard for me to fit a cereal box the way I wanted it, where I wanted it. So I put a container in there so they fit better for us. But what that means is like whenever the thing is empty, I have to open a cereal box and pour the thing in there. And like there is some maintenance that happens with that, but I'm okay with it, right? Like once a week, as I'm planning for my grocery shopping, I kind of go into the pantry, I organize a little bit because, children never throw any boxes away, even if it's empty. So I pull out anything that's been empty. I double check to see what's, like what supplies do we need, especially with like breakfast stuff and cereal bars and things like that. And then I refill the cereal containers back in. Then I get a gauge for like how many boxes are there left? Like, what do we need? And so to me is a good time to like inventory what's already there. So I don't mind that process. But I did a pantry not that long ago where she didn't want any boxes at all. She didn't want any plastic containers. She didn't want, like, everything went in jars. And I did say to her, I was just like, this is going to be a ton of maintenance. Like every time you go to the grocery store, everything you purchase is going to have to be open and put in a container. I was like, are you really okay with that? And not that long ago, this was like a year ago, not that long ago, she texted me. She's like, oh my God, I love my pantry. Every time I go in there, it's just magical. And I'm like, okay, I wonder how much time she's spending, maintaining it. But it felt to me like she was committed to that process. And so it depends on your level of commitment. How committed are you, Susan?
Yeah, I guess it also depends on how fast you use things. If you don't use them real fast, maybe having a few boxes isn't a big deal, but you don't
Yeah.
need the visual of, somebody else has used it up and you're not aware of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think cereal seems to be like the most common one that, people do. And it does feel like, like, I don't know, depending on how many people we have, how many cereals you have. Like currently we have 5 different kinds of cereals that's been used, 1 box of like oatmeal, and there's another box of something else. So there's quite a bit to maintain, right? But it doesn't feel like a lot to me. So I think the question is always to be like, are you okay with the maintenance? That would just be my only downside. However, the plus size to me, which I would, which is the reason why I did it, is you're right. It's very visual. I can totally see when the cereal is empty. And before, when they would eat up the whole thing and just leave the empty box, and I'd be like, oh, it's okay, we have another box. And then I would go down there and be like, it's empty. And that would drive me crazy. So visually, I can see when it's gone. And it's just super organized. Whenever I look at it, I was just like, this gives me happiness and peace just to see it neatly organized. Where before it was always like really unruly. And as you may guess, unruly makes me really angry. So I was like, don't want that. Any other questions anybody have? Okay. Okay, so I just want to remind you guys that yesterday I threw in a bonus. So for every project that you accomplish and you share your before and afters with us, I'm going to enter your name into a bowl. And I should say that if you showed up to this call live, you also get your name in the bowl just for being here. I feel like that every day that you come, you get your name in there. I know it's late that I'm telling people this, but people that show up gets, the early bird gets the worm or something like that. So I'm going to put your name in there. And then at the end of the week, I'm going to rummage through it and I'm going to pick one name and somebody's going to get to spend a couple of hours virtually with me. And you can ask whatever questions you would like, you can solve whatever organizing problems you have. If you don't have any organizing problems and you just want to talk about the meaning of life, we can do that too. I'm all game for that any day of the week. So, so I want you to, the goal of this week is just really to like experience momentum, right? The goal is to start a small project that may bring you joy and make you happy. So then you can maybe create some momentum and organize areas around your home. The goal was to start small and pick something simple. So our first project was a junk drawer. And then yesterday we did a coat closet, and today we're doing a pantry. It is not my goal to overwhelm anyone. So if you feel like, oh man, I'm taking a long time just to organize my junk drawer, don't worry about it, right? Just keep up the good work and just like try to get this muscle rolling. So maybe you'll feel like in the next, I don't know, even if it takes you a whole year just to organize the 5 areas, at least you got started and at least you made a difference in those areas for yourself. So, Angela, you had your hand up. You changed your mind?
Yeah, I'm good. I appreciate it. It's just
Okay,
like you said, good information. Trying not
cool.
to overwhelm my expectations.
Yeah, I think I find that like setting good expectations for ourselves is like the first step into anything we do, right? And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a high achiever just like the next guy, and I can be really harsh on myself too, especially when I don't achieve the thing that I thought I wanted to achieve. So I wanted to, this is a reminder that I'm here with you to like have fun and to like get something accomplished, but the goal is not to be stressed and overwhelmed about it. If you're feeling that, then like, stop immediately, because we're doing something that is not what we're supposed to be doing. So Michelle, you have your hand up. You want to ask a
Hi.
question?
Yes. Thank you for being so encouraging. You've really been an inspiration.
Oh,
So
thank you.
my husband appreciates it. How do you deal with your spices? Like, how do you
My-
store them?
We currently, so once again, like, my partner cooks a lot, so we have a whole lot of spices in our kitchen. And
Ditto.
some of it we have, and I can take a picture of it. Like some of it we have organized in drawers, and they do consume a lot of space. And
Yeah.
and like, and I can tell you that if we lived in a small space and we had a smaller kitchen, the spices would still take as much space as they do. Like this is
Yeah.
the tea example where it's like, we're not going to minimize the amount of spices. We're going to have less bowls and less plates and less mugs because the spices must stay. So we organize some of them in drawers because they're tall, so they don't fit.
Mhm.
We have one drawer that has a spice rack, and that came with our cabinet. It's not necessarily the best of spice racks, but it holds a lot of spices there. And then we have some in like, we do have a turntable in
Mhm.
one of the cabinets for like oils and things like that, and like some other specialty specialty wine cooking thing. And then we have some on the top shelf, which are like, like your special occasion spices. So there's a lot of spices. I do like the the graduated stadium
Mhm.
organizers for cabinets, 'cause they go like a little stairs. I think it makes it visually easy to see all the spices because they tend to be smallish. I do sometimes recommend people to like purchase some. They're like a uniform size, and then recontainerize them so you can have uniformity, and then they can fit into a smaller space. Costco is like the worst thing that ever happened to us when it comes to spices, because they will have the
Yeah.
enormous
We have
thing.
those.
So those would probably be better suited into like a smaller container, so then you can have all your spices together, and then you can overstock some of it maybe in your pantry or in the basement or in a different place where they don't take as much space. That way you can like minimize your kitchen. But what is the problem that you're having with your spices?
So my husband's like your Rob, and he can cook whatever, but we can't find the spices sometimes. It's not like organized. It's like we have the turntable cabinet or the Lazy Susan cabinet, and then I have 2 drawers that have the pull-out shelves that have all the spices, but they're just kind of everywhere. There's no rhyme or reason to it.
Yeah.
So I think some spices get like missed, and then we end up duplicating because we don't know we have it.
Yeah. And spices is probably like, and I do have to say that probably like once every couple of months, because like he is a really good cook, and our middle my middle bonus daughter is definitely like, she's 13 and she like gets in the kitchen like he does.
Yep.
You know, she doesn't follow a recipe, she just
Yep.
throws things in together. And but because she's 13, she never puts anything back where they belong, so she
My
shoves
husband,
it. Yeah,
they
she
don't have to be
shoves
13.
she shoves it wherever she sees space, and I'm like, dude, that's not where it goes.
Yeah.
But yesterday I talked about like our family members are not always going to engage in the process of organizing like you do, because it's not important to them. So I personally take it upon myself then to like every couple of months just go there and reorganize things. And like they did tell me the other day, they were like, you're messing up our system. And I was like, oh, you had a system? Please share. And they were like, yeah, we have like, we have like our Middle Eastern spices over here, and then we have our Asian spices over here, and then we have like our everyday spices over there. And I was like, oh, that was fascinating to me, because I was thinking they were messing it all up, but they really had created a system between the two of them. So I was like, oh, that really makes sense to me now. So I was organizing it by size, and I was organized. So visually for me, it was important that they kind of fit. And they were like, no, you're doing it wrong, because some of the spices were smaller. And so I was like, okay, that makes sense. So I was like, okay, how can I make this work for them and for me? So I rearranged it in a way that it made sense. It still visually doesn't look as good as I wanted it to, but I was like, I'm going to get over it, because they actually do have a system. So it makes sense to them.
Okay.
I would ask him like, what do you
What
find
works for
works
you?
best? Yeah.
Okay.
I do find that like in the drawers where we have them inside of the drawers, that the spices that have label on the top are super helpful. So as I've been replacing them from the store, I've been getting the same kind, and I've been like trying to get the ones that have labeling on the top.
Okay.
So I do sometimes taking like, you have to take the context of what you have and where you can store the thing, and then figure out how to best do it. And sometimes it's like it's a long-term plan here.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'll try.
You're welcome. And I mean, I feel like sometimes I just tell them like, you've got to get rid of some stuff. Like
Gotcha.
you bought spices and you tried it once and you're never going to use it again. Does it really make sense to keep this stuff forever? Right. And
Right.
so
Okay.
I think once a
Minimize.
year,
Yeah.
I'm just like, we're going to pull all this stuff down and we're going to get rid of some stuff. And I think the last year when I made them do it, they got rid of like 12 things.
Oh,
So
okay.
it felt like a good exercise.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. However, I don't know if I'm repeating myself, but like spices is something that probably requires more maintenance than anything else in your kitchen. And like pantries are the second probably biggest maintenance in your kitchen, right? Spices, because it's really tchotchke and unruly. And then pantries just because it is like a lot of in and out constantly. Depending how often you shop, people are going in there multiple times a day, every day. So there's a lot of touch points for it to get messy. Sally, what did you say? The recordings are in two different places. One is I've been posting them every night on the Facebook group, and we have two Facebook groups. We didn't mean to confuse you, but we have a main Facebook group, and then we created one just for the challenge. So it's Grow versus Clutter 5 and 5. That's where the recordings are. And we also email them to everyone that register for the class, which I assume if you're here, you register, that should come in your email. And Joyce and I worked late last night, and probably going to work late today again, trying to get the videos out to everybody before the day is over. But you may get it tomorrow morning instead. That's where they are. Let's see. Does anyone have a foolproof number to get someone? No, I really don't. I have a hard time finding anything at anyone to talk to on Amazon. That's crazy. Can you post a picture of your pantry? Yes, I'm gonna totally post a picture of my pantry before and after. I'm gonna organize it after we're done. Cereal keeps a long time in Tupperware. That is true. The other day, thanks Mary Alice for saying that. The other day I was like, I like pulled down the Cheerios and I was like, nobody has eaten Cheerios in months. How is that? And then I had a couple and I was like, they're still tasty. So I was like, I put them back in. Sometimes I feel like children also think of these things as becoming stale, which is the reason why they don't eat it. So I think I'm going to hide it for a couple of weeks and then they'll think it's fresh again. We talked about spices. Okay, what else do we have here? All right, so any other questions? Going once, going twice. Okie dokie, then thanks for coming. I can't wait to see your pantries. I really appreciate your participation, your love, and your support. Hugs and kisses to
Mhm.
you. Happy organizing, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you for the info.
Oh, you're welcome. You guys have a good night. I'll see you
You
tomorrow.
too.
Bye.